which is the updates, which I think can be quick, and we can then go to the discussion of the engagement plan. So anyway, for our OSSI update, Jacques, why don't you, as our leader in the OSSI meeting, give us your sense of what they said.
Give you a synopsis, so to speak, give this group a synopsis of how that conversation went. I think relatively it went pretty well. For the most part, I think anytime that you're changing dynamics, and this is something that I spoke with Ruth yesterday in a personal phone call with her, and you're kind of setting the table as opposed to just listening and kind of reacting to it, it's a little off-putting. And when we raised it with them, they said that they have timetables that they have to adhere to, and we said we want to be very amenable to the timetables that they have, but that this committee is going to push forward with its work and will reconcile how we're going and how progress is being made as we go along. We just wanted to make sure that they were, that they understood that this is something that is important to the State Board of Education and that we're pushing forward. And they said, okay, we understand. They don't know exactly where they're going to be because they have so much that they're working on at the current time. We told them that we can do a lot of the work in the writing and stuff like that, but that we do want to sit down with them and we don't want to get caught off guard. Should something come from the Department of Education where they need something in a hurry, we will be prepared with what the work we've done. We'll reconcile it and then put that forth, but that we will have recommendations that will come out of this group that OSSI that they can look at, and I think they're open to it. The main thing is that they're open to it, and they're looking to working with us. That was what we wanted to set. The most important thing of the whole meeting was that we have a very collegial kind of relationship as they're doing what they're doing and we're doing what we're doing. I think Ruth, that sums it up pretty much to the most part.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, go right ahead, Jean-Paul.
I do want to, and this was in the readout that Emily sent as well, that the sort of process that OSSI has followed in the past for like the high school growth.
Yes, that came up. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is what they intend to follow again in terms of a proposal. So, once something is developed, they will bring it to us and to the public for input, and then test it, and then bring it back for a vote once it's sort of been tested.
Right.
Well,
Exactly right.
They did not talk about the testing per se. I didn't actually take it to be that, Jean-Paul.
Oh, okay.
I mean, maybe it was, but I mean, some of these things, I don't know that they need to be tested. And
I think they alluded to it, Ruth, kind of very, surface, so to speak, that they will follow their process. And that's what they're alluding to. And they may have went a little bit more into definition or something like that. But I get it that they're going to follow their process and their kind of like timeline that they're going to do and that they set. So, and that's okay. My main thing is that that I wanted to come out of that is we'll be engaging people like we're about to discuss, just like they're engaging. They may not be the same individuals and stuff like that, as our focal point is to get certain things out of our engagement as we redesign. And I wanted them to truly understand that aspect of what our process was going to be, that we're going to be engaging folks in a way that may be different than what they're doing. And even though they have their way of doing things, the state board is going to, according to the plan that we set with this group, is going to engage.
So I just want to clarify. I mean, it's complicated, but so on the one hand, our group, we have a timeline to make recommendations. And we are very clear, and I think we're all on board that we want to have a set of recommendations to them as early after July as possible. I want to come back to whether it's July or whether it's September. Under the law as it has existed so far, under the practice that has existed so far, OSSI could propose changes to the rating system in March that would then be in that system the following December. Now, yeah.
No, well, no, it wouldn't be, because the rating for December is for the previous school year.
Right.
So if they make it in March, it wouldn't start until the next school year.
Well, I think that is, and Jacques and I talked about that. I mean, I'm not sure that's part of the law. In other words, you don't have to change the indicator. In other words, let's say the change was instead of growth being 40% growth was 80%. I'm just pulling that out of the hat. It's no change to anybody doing anything, right? So I think you could propose that in March and it would be effective in December.
So let me ask a question. How much time do we have to also give the LEAs to know that there will be something else that they will be measured by? Is a question that I have.
Right, and I think that's probably what Aussie's argument would be.
Yes.
Is that they would not want to implement a new system, even if it is like a change like you're talking about just, it's not a data collection thing, it's a back end calculation thing. But I don't think that they would be supportive of putting something, and I don't want to talk for them, but approving something that would go into place after a school year has already begun.
Well, all the more reason that we must make the request, have them make the request in March, because if they don't make, let's just say you're right, John Paul. And Jacques, what you're saying is that would mean that if Aussie made a request to Aussie, I'm sorry, if Aussie made a request to the education department in March 2022 for a change in the rating, that would not go into effect until December 2023, 2.5 years from now.
Well, it would go into effect. It just wouldn't be there.
It wouldn't show up. We would not see a new star rating for 2.5 years from now. That is if Aussie proposed something in March.
March 2022. It would
in
show
March 2022, we would have something new in 2.5 years. And that assumes, I believe, John Paul, that there wouldn't be this testing to see how something went before you put it in, which would make it 3.5 years. And I just want to say, I don't think that's acceptable.
No, I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, I think they could potentially use, previous year data to test in some situations.
If you had that data, but we may have new indicators.
Yeah, if we have new indicators, I think you're probably right that it may be an extended amount of time.
So John Paul, is it my understanding that there's the very real possibility that we'll have at least one more star rating under the current metrics? Is that correct?
Maybe, right? Because there isn't going to be a rating in we're this December.
Right, there's not going to have one this December, but we're going to come out of this and they're going to ask again for the ratings, which will be next year, right? December. Okay. So whatever went into this upcoming school year, the new school year, would go into that.
I think
then while we're designing and trying to implement and telling schools what they're going to receive and what the new star rating is, we would receive at least one rating system under the current metrics.
Maybe. And I hate saying maybe, but I think it has to be maybe because so many of our scores are comparative from year to year. And so if we haven't tested in Park for 2 years, then I don't know how we would calculate some of those things. So I'm not convinced there's going to be a full star rating in December 2022, regardless of what we do in submit in the recs, because I don't know how you calculate that, right?
You got a point.
And Darren sent some really interesting information from the Data Quality Center about comparisons, with a skip year or a gap year of 1 year and 2 years that I think is really interesting for us to consider as well, whether or not that's sort of valid or not and that type of thing. And I think it depends on the scenario, but that's my, again, and to Ruth's point, this is very much what I am assuming based on what I am reading. But if it changes, I don't know. I mean, I don't think we know. And I think this is the other part that Aussie was saying, right, is that we haven't gotten guidance from USED whether and when they would accept amendments and how that process will work. I think the assumption, and I think this is the right assumption for us to make, is that it will likely follow somewhat what has happened in the previous cycle, which was that there was a sort of March was the first opportunity or the deadline to submit an amendment for that next school year.
So, I mean, I think we need to put all this back on, for our follow-up with Asi on this. One thing that I would like to find out, maybe Darren could, is the extent to which the education department requires the extra year. In other words, if we're using something that already exists, but we want to change the weight, to what extent does the education department require that we have to go through, an extra year to tell the schools and do the testing? And to what extent is that awesome? I mean, I just think we need to know that. So, all right, so more to be figured out with them on that. I mean, I'll just say for myself, I think not having any changes on this for 3.5 years is really a problem. So I'm just going to say that, and we can come back to it. Jacques, you still there? All right, he's probably on a call or something. All right. Okay, the other timeline issue, and Jacques knows this, so he won't lose out, but Carlene, one of the things that we talked about actually in the admin meeting is the possibility that we could vote on this in September, not July. But August is going to be we're going to go through this, I guess, at the working session, the working meeting, but there's a proposal that would make August a sort of a break, no committee meetings, no stuff, but we would have a public meeting just with people, public testimony, not with a panel. And therefore not with a vote, because people wouldn't be asked to review something. So we can either do our vote on this in July, or we can delay it till September. It's early in September, so I was less opposed to putting it off than I was, and it would give us some extra time between our public engagement in June, bringing some proposals to the working meeting in July, which I think we would still do, but then we'd have we'd have sort of an extra month in there just for people to deliberate, do any further follow-up, whatever we want to do, and then vote in September. So that's sort of my sense of where we would probably like to be, if that sounds good with people. This gives us, but we would still need, I just want to be, I still think we need to hit all of the existing deadlines that we have. It just gives us that extra time at the end. Okay, I'm taking silence as consent. Okay, all right. So moving to the engagement plan. So what I wanted to do, and I just, we need to get really clear, I think, on what it is we're trying to accomplish, and therefore how we're going to accomplish it. So one thing I did, which I am going to put in the I had this so well set up, I just want to say, so that I could find everything. Is that it? Yes, here we go. All right. Okay. So, oops.
Yes.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly. There it is. Okay.
Okay. You got your screen with me.
Got lost between my big screen and my computer. All right. I am going to email this to everybody, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay. You can put it in chat, or you can email, whichever way you like. We got it. We got you.
All right. Because I don't think I can put a Word document into the chat, can I?
You should be able to drag and drop the file into the chat if you'd like to. I did make you co-host though, so if you want to share your screen, we can do that as well.
Well, I'd like to do, if I can, I want to do both. So let's see if that happens. No, it's not. No, I'm going to just send it. Okay. Okay. All right, now I am also going to share my, you've got it, so you can look at it. And so this is not working the way I meant it to work. Hold on. But you can start looking at that.
Maybe I can share my screen. Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be very helpful. But I don't understand why I can't do this.
Oh, you know what? My
Ah, okay, wait, I just found, there, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
And it's the, all right. So, I mean, so we've talked a lot about the engagement, right? I mean, the goal here is we want to come up with, oh, wait, this is Darren's screen?
Mhm.
Oh, I thought it was my screen. Okay, I guess I didn't figure mine out. Okay.
Aaron, I might need you to go up to 200%.
Thank you. I had that same thought process because my eyes are even older than yours. So thank you, Dr. Reed.
Oh my goodness.
is this better?
Yes, very much
I can read that.
so. Uh-huh.
So the reason I'm showing this is to, I think we have to get very clear about what we are trying to accomplish in our engagement. And I want to look at this, and then I want to look at sort of a set of, here are the kinds of people we can engage and what are we going to do? Because we've talked a lot about it. And what are we trying to accomplish here?
Mhm.
So I pulled really from the questions that were from the memo from our last meeting, where we sort of agreed on a set of questions. At the bottom, it's the questions that we talked about. But sort of what do we believe, part of what we're, as we move forward, this is what we said, developing our own ideas on this and considering how we will approach public engagement. What are the key questions to focus on? And what we said was, what do we believe are the key elements, indicators of a high quality school? To what extent does a particular element, indicator reflect school quality versus systemic bias of some sort? To what extent does a particular element or indicator have a useful versus a damaging incentive effect on school practice? To what extent is a particular element indicator within the control of the school as opposed to the LEA or the city? How to show account for performance treatment of different categories. And then the issue about assistance. I don't know why it's not on that bottom. Anyway, so this was an effort to try to pull those questions together, expand some, and sort of think about who are we trying to learn what from? You know, as we go, I mean, I think part of making sure the engagement isn't just show, right, is what are we really trying to learn from people? And this first set of questions is kind of the things that we said parents want from this. And I think, you know, we have a range of views about how much is this for parents. Hello, Jessica. This should be in your mail as well as up here. Okay. So we had a range of views about the extent to which is this really meant for parents, not for parents. But parents look at it. We know we want to talk to parents about it. So this first set of questions is more than anything aimed at what we want to know from parents. You know, does this capture the indicators that matter to you? Does this capture your idea of what quality is? And to a point that Jessica has raised, you know, some of these dashboards are very complicated, complex to look at. And so we want to get a sense of, you know, is it comprehensible and readable or not? So that's this first set of questions. And then we go into sort of the questions that are kind of more policy oriented, more oriented towards what parents may not have specific views about, specific knowledge about, but they're very important to us nonetheless. And that we would want to talk to parents about insofar as they are want to talk about it, but we'd also want to talk to experts. We would want to talk to school leaders and principals we talked about who have a certain view of how these things work. We'd want to talk to advocates. And because we want to ultimately connect this to assistance, I think we want to talk to council members, LEA leaders about, you know, is this a kind of thing that would help you determine what schools need more money? Would this be a credible, more money or more of some other resource? What would be credible here? So can we just take 5 minutes, everybody take a look at this. Maybe just 3 minutes, I don't know. And let's talk about if this gets at what we're trying to get at, and then we can talk about how, where and how we're going to find people, you know, meetings, surveys, etc. All right, so 3 minutes. And if we think we need more, that's fine too. If people feel like, oh, this is plenty of time, just say so.
So Ruth, whenever we start commentary, I'd love to share a little conversation I had today and how I think that influences my views on these questions.
Okay, very good. You can be first up. Okay, we ready? All right. Okay. All right, Jessica, you want to start?
Sure thing. So a few weeks ago, I sent the committee an article from Future Ed about perspectives on how to spend COVID relief aid. And one of the articles in there was from a guy named Dr. Stephen Pruitt, who is the president of the Southern Regional Education Board, the SREB. There are 16 states in the SREB multi-state compact. DC is not one of them, but everybody around us is. So Maryland, Delaware, Virginia are all part of it. And Dr. Pruitt was one of the writers of the the Next Generation Science Standards and former state superintendent in Kentucky. So I had reached out to him saying, I really liked his perspective in the Future Ed article because it related to a lot of what we talked about as a committee around his post is called Measure What Matters Most. And he gets at access and equitable access to opportunities and how we think about using our ESSA framework to measure equitable access to opportunities. And since that's something the committee has talked about at length around like access to equitable and rich curriculum and how that might play into what we think about as a quality school, I asked him if he would talk with me. So we had an hour-long conversation. It was a pretty great conversation. He also has offered to come speak with either our committee or the board. But I wanted to point out 3 things he talked about in terms of the process by which Kentucky developed their accountability framework and how he thinks about this concept of measuring what matters most, because I think it gets at what I am wondering about with our approach to engagement. The first thing he mentioned is ensuring that the process is not top down, that the process is genuinely sourced by the community. So to Representative Reed's point, making sure we tease out the difference between what council members might want and LEA leaders might want, and maybe even school leaders, how they perceive this, because I think that getting buy-in from the folks affected by this framework is gonna matter a great deal. So I think that was one really key piece he mentioned, including making sure we have our critics on board. So making sure that as we're thinking about questions we have about what kind of metrics belong in the system, that we also invite folks who are fans of the current system to provide rich feedback so that as we build our base of evidence, we don't go back to the folks who disagree with us and say, see here what we found, but rather that they're part of the engagement process all along. That was one point. The second point is he talked about the difference between big A accountability and little a accountability. And in Kentucky, that meant the pieces that are part of their star rating, and they have a star rating, versus what's part of their dashboard, which I think is the equivalent of our report card. That's what I got the sense of from him. I haven't been able to dive deeply into their framework. What he noted was that they put things in their star rating, their big A accountability, that they had baseline data for. So test scores are easy, you got baseline data, you've got clean ways to measure that. That goes into the big A accountability. But the little a accountability, all the publicly reported data on every school, is the fodder for the metrics so that you might want to bring in the future. And he made the point, like, they cared a lot about whether students had access to arts and music programming. Now, their state data system, which is going to be my third point, their state data system was so built out that every LEA across the state used this thing called Infinite Campus as their school information system. And they were able to have insights into all the master schedules of every school in every LEA. Now, we don't have that, but that was something they had. So they used this access to courses and access to content on their dashboard for a period of time to establish baseline data levels before they rolled it up into something schools were held accountable for as part of their quality metric. One question I have for us is, could we add in feedback around things that are on our report card that we now have 2 years of data on, might have 3 years of data on, given what OSSI reported last year, to say, are there any of those that we think are measures of quality that deserve to be rolled up into big A accountability? So are there things we've been reporting on publicly for 2 years, but not putting in the star, that we think deserve to be in the star because they're a metric of school quality? And because they were part of the publicly reported data, it's not seen as though like you're blindsiding an LEA with this new metric, but rather like, you've been reporting on it publicly, we're just now going to count it in a way that it didn't count before, and working on buy-in on that. So that's the second thing that I took away. The third thing I took away, which I think was really helpful, was his points about their data system and about what was in their data system that let them do some really interesting things. So he noted that they take the ACT in Kentucky as their college and career assessment at high school level. We don't do that, obviously, but like every high schooler takes it. They use the ACT data to build a regression analysis to look at what the level of achievement would be to be on track for middle school and on track at the end of elementary school to be college and career ready. So equivalent for us is like, what PARC score is at the end of 5th grade? Tell us you're on track to be college and career ready by the end of high school based on a regression analysis from kids who graduated and went to college. So all of that was only possible to basically start holding elementary and middle schools accountable for their college success contribution because they had this extraordinarily well built out data system. So the thing I wonder about, given the auditor's report to us and our feedback on this, is how do we make questions about what data we need but don't have part of our engagement? How do we combine thinking about what data the state should collect but doesn't collect as part of our engagement on this? Because I might say, I want access to AP courses to be part of the STAR framework because that's equitable. But if we don't collect course data in OSSI's system, which we don't now, we will not be able to include that in our system. So that's my third thing, is like their data system seemed to enable a lot of really cool pieces of their accountability system that we can't do. And so how do we loop that into our engagement? So I would highly advise we have him come speak to us or the whole board. But I also really liked the conversation. I'll type up all my notes because there's a few other things worth sharing. But those are my big takeaways and how I think it impacts our engagement. That like what most of our questions here seem to suggest, like, what do you like or don't like about the system we've got? And that's fair feedback. But I think what we're shooting for is a system that helps us design a system that we believe really measures school quality, that may include elements of the current system, but may need to include different things. I'm not sure how we get at that with the general public, but I hope that's part of our mission.
So I want to let everybody else in, but I just want to say one easy thing, which is on the, what else would you like to know? I think there's sort of a generic question on this. 1, 2, 3, the fourth one down, but actually that's, but we can easily add what, both what other indicators do people want to know about? And then we can talk about ways to show that, you can show people other examples, give them lists and so on. So that one I think is sort of easy to do in the context. It's easy to ask, but what?
I think it's easy to ask in terms of the universe of what folks might care about. But the reason I bring in the data system is I'm not sure it's so easy given what data we collect or could collect at present.
Right, but it would put us in a position to say, people are interested in this, we're interested in this, we hope that this is something you'll take up, right? I mean, that would have to be the first step, I think. Am I understanding you right?
Yeah, though I also think that there's a question of like, what's on the report card that you may want to see be part of the STAR?
Oh, okay.
which is an
okay.
easier lift because we
Uh-huh.
know they
Yeah, yeah,
collect
no,
it.
I like that. Okay. So unfortunately, because I'm not on the, because I didn't share, I'm adding this to mine, but you can't see it. So Darren, I think you should also, I guess, add. I just said, what other indicators do people want to know about, and what indicators already on the report card would people like to see in the rating? In the rating dashboard, whatever. Okay. All right. Other responses to either this as a whole or what Jessica raised? And let me say this, after we do the substance, we're going to talk about the people. So what I would suggest is, obviously they're connected, so say whatever you want. Okay.
I'm sorry, Ruth, could you repeat what you'd like me to add?
What other indicators do people want to know about is one. And then another, what indicators already on the report card would people like to see in the rating dashboard? Actually, the first one should be what other indicators that we haven't mentioned would people like to see included in a rating or dashboard?
So that's just one line.
Yeah, and then
Or
another.
what other indicators already collected? You
Here,
want to see as part of the STAR framework?
Yeah, you know what, I will, here, let me just send these to you. It's probably, oh, actually, I'll just drop them in the chat. Easy. So, and I'm also going to add one. And again, these aren't the words or the intent. It's how can we what would you say, add more questions that get at equity? Is that how you would? Just looking at the chat here.
Well, so I think there's some things that would get at equity from us from a input side, right? We've talked a little bit about inputs versus outcomes. Like, I think there are lots of questions about equitable outcomes. But I think if we're talking about equitable inputs, I think that would be a really good question for like what from the report card might help us with that. Like, maybe that's about the teacher stuff. Like, are there elements of teacher quality or teacher licensure or teacher status that OSSI reports that people feel really strongly about? I will say, frankly, I am less convinced on the inclusion of teacher tenure or teacher licensure as an element of school quality. But I have heard that from folks who testified to us, that they feel like the teacher metrics are things that should be included as part of school quality. So wouldn't necessarily be my pick, but I feel like we might hear that from stakeholders based on testimony we've had so far.
And on the input side, I just want to say the we're trying to focus on the accountability piece as opposed to the report card piece, understanding that there's a fudgy line there. But input often would mean things that sort of cost money, you know, to somebody. And so the lack of it is not in the control of the school. So it's not something I think that we want to put in school quality. It's where we want to, it's that other piece of stuff. Okay,
Ruth, let
Doc
me
is
understand.
smiling,
You're
so
saying
Doc gets to,
that while we've talked about access to well-rounded education being an important piece of school quality, you don't believe that it belongs on the school. So it
no,
wouldn't
I'm
be.
not, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, I was really putting a caveat to what you were saying, that there are some aspects of input that aren't at the school level, and there certainly are some that are. That's all I was saying.
I know, I guess I was exploring that further. Like, so for instance, one complaint we have heard is time for science and social studies in school schedules. My understanding is that there's a limit to how much control an individual principal has over a master schedule. So is that something we put on a school quality rating, or something we feel like is outside the control of a school, given that's a question that we're putting in here for engagement?
It's a good question. I actually think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think it's partly the school and partly the district. It's a fair point though, because it's not total. You're right.
I worry about that question for that reason, that there are things we want to keep wholly in the control of the school that may rarely be wholly in control of individual schools.
And that's where a lot of time where I struggle personally, like what's in the control. We're rating schools sometimes on things that they control and some things that they cannot control, but the rating totally falls on that school at the end of the day, whether they can control that particular metric or not. So I do want to make sure that we are fair in that sense. And I got that constituency basically from a lot of the teachers that I had in the Georgetown program with me. Is like, I have no control over this, but I'm going to be rated on this. And my school is going to continuously have a low rating on this particular metric.
So, I mean, one thing we could do is, as part of our engagement and as part of our thinking generally, is to, you know, like write up a bucket of here are, well, two things. One, for every indicator we put out. I mean, maybe we put out a grab bag of indicators, and for each one, you know, we note that it is or is not school level. And then we ask people among those that are school. Well, can we do this? Can we step back and just say, if we were only going to try to do things that were really largely within the schools ability. I mean, what would we say? I mean, I think that, and none of it is complete, right? But I think one thing we have seen in various research reports and have a sense of is that growth, certainly relative growth, is substantially in the school bailiwick. And that is part of why, even when the proficiency levels are very different across higher and lower poverty schools, growth can be is much more distributed. So I mean, so I'll just start. I would say growth, test score growth is largely in schools domain, I'll just call it.
Yes, and yes, and because growth also has to do a lot with resources. Those schools, if you have the resources that can really address some of the issues that are being pointed at, you can make better growth. Case in point, if you have the social workers that you need, or if you have certain things that you need that can allow a teacher to focus on the kids that are doing well, and then also making sure that the kids who need extra support are getting the things that they need, then you can see growth in those classrooms. So growth is very closely correlated to resources.
It is,
And they don't always control their resources, is what I'm getting, that full circle.
right. So I guess I would put two questions to you, Jacques. I mean, when in what we looked at last year, and this is in that interim STAR report, the difference between, I mean, we didn't look, it's true. I mean, we didn't look at school resources per se, but what we can say is that growth happened at schools of all poverty levels. So it's not the school resource per se.
To your
which is
point. I
different.
see your point.
But
I do see your point on that, parts of that.
So
And,
I wanna
wait, Jessica, let me just ask one other question to Jacques, just to follow that up, which is then, and if you go to that point, Jacques, to sort of say, well, there's not enough social workers, which I agree with, then you kind of end up with, there's nothing you can put just on the school level, which frankly is part of why I'm more for a dashboard, you know, but that's a question. Jessica.
So that was basically where I'm going, Ruth, which is I think that it's an interesting intellectual exercise to say what's more on the schools versus what's more on the district versus what's more on the state. But at the end of the day, LEAs are responsible for their schools. And so when a school is called out as having not met the mark of what is expected for providing a quality education to its children, the district is obligated to fix it. That's how education systems in America work. And they work that way all over the country. That like, if a school is struggling, it is the district's obligation to fix it. And if the district fails to fix it, it's the state's obligation to step in and support it. And our point here is that we feel like the STAR rating, that our committee point. So again, this is not my personal view. Our committee's viewpoint is that the STAR rating is calling out the schools, but the systems above it are not in place to do what they're supposed to do. So we call out the school as having not met the mark, but the district is not held responsible to fix that school, and the state is not helping the district make those repairs.
That part.
I don't think, though, that changing the metrics on the STAR system fixes that systematic problem that we believe to be true. I think there are elements of adjusting the metrics on the STAR system that could be more fair to the schools. So for instance, if we were to say, we're gonna give schools an additional point, so to speak, for how well they grow their children designated at risk, because that is an area in the city where we see some schools excelling and some schools falling flat. And we want to make sure that we are rewarding schools that do it well. So if that's the case, we should adjust the metrics that do that. My two concerns are, I don't know that a parent in the engagement process is going to engage in that level of discourse with us. And that's not a knock on our parents. That's just they don't live in the weeds where we do. So I wonder about when we talk about engagement, could we have a level of broad engagement that we're going out to the general public with? And could we also have a level of engagement that we're going to with folks who live in the weeds with us, like school leaders and LEA leaders?
So in this list, that is part of the idea, is that some of these are questions that are especially for parents, and some of them are questions that are especially for other kinds of people, to exactly that point. You're on mute, Jessica.
Can you scroll down a little bit though? Because I feel like this metrics question is on the parents list, and that's where I get a little worried. Yeah, like to what extent do you believe the indicator substantially reflects the quality of a particular school? And
Well, it's really, I mean,
does this indicator reflect school quality versus systemic bias? Okay, we don't ask that of parents. That's good.
it's just that, yeah. I mean, we could reword that one that you were assuming. The point is, do you think this is an important thing to know about your school? Because it has to do with the quality. I mean,
I was thinking we might need to pilot this measure or approach. And I hate to add like an extra step in our timeline, but I would just hate that we get to a point where we're just not asking the right questions or asking the right questions to the right groups, or one group didn't get asked the question that we should have. So that's the only thing that's kind of giving me pause about like locking into some of these aspects, because there could be elements or things that we're in this, our brains together aren't picking up of the people who are living and breathing it every day. So that's kind of I'm watching this, but I'm kind of like, I mean, I think also like a start is always good, but I feel like maybe like a pilot or something to get some folks together just to make sure we're not missing.
well, I mean, the first, we can certainly figure out a way to do some pilots, but it seems to me, we first have to make some suppositions, which is really all I'm trying to get to here is what are we trying to accomplish? What do we want to know from people? And then I think you're right, Carlene. I mean, we should test it and see if we can get it. But I mean, to Jessica's point, I very much agree with what she said, which is, we've talked a lot about engagement, but exactly what is it that we're asking who? What are we really trying to find out? And I think what we're trying to find out from parents is this a meaningful indicator for you? Do you, how much do you care about it? How much do you think, apart from anything technical, to what extent do you regard it as part of quality? It seems to me that is a reasonable question for parents. But these questions of how do you drain out the bias from something, that's sort of a kind of a set of experts that we want to ask. How do you, what either destructive or constructive incentive effect does having this in our rating have? Is something that, parents aren't going to be so up on, some may, but it's going to be more something that principals really know, advocates really follow it. But I'm going to make a note, and I'm sure Darren will too, that,
I think we also
pilot.
might not know. Yeah, I wonder if there's room for like folks in the nation who might have certain elements that we don't have that can give us pro and con information to because we don't know what we haven't experienced. So we might say, I can't think of something. We might pick an element that we think is really, which I think what's happening in all of this. We pick an element that we think that is really meaningful, and then we implement it for a while, and we're like, oh, snap, this actually did the reverse of what we expected, or wasn't useful, or caused something, or I don't know. So it might just be also worth a bucket of people if there are certain elements that we're curious about, or displays, or I don't know, individuals in the country who have, or school system folks in the country, or somebody else outside of DC could be a possible.
So I think that's totally right. And we have talked to experts about a bunch of things, but we should do more. And to do that, here's one of the issues, is we have to narrow down the things we are most interested in, because we can't ask 1,000 experts about 1,000 things. So what are the, half a dozen things we are the most interested in? And then we can bring together some experts, some we already have, we have some memos, we have some experts, but we can also go out and get more. But what are the things that we want to focus on? Jessica?
I like that idea of narrowing what we want to focus on, but I want to propose an alternative way of thinking about it rather than, so asking key questions about what we think of the STAR framework now versus what the STAR framework is in our imagination as perfection. So for instance, we have heard feedback that the STAR framework privileges schools that serve more privileged populations of students.
Yes.
Or we could frame it differently. We've heard the STAR framework unfairly penalizes schools that serve the hardest, the highest needs students.
Yes.
What have you seen in systems across the country that does a better job of equitably treating schools regardless of the population of students they serve? That way, Ruth, we wouldn't hone in on like this metric, not that metric, but we would instead get at the essential core of what our root problem is. I think for the new members, Dr. Reed and Mr. Patterson, we had really at times, I think Ruth would agree, deeply frustrating conversations over the purpose. Like, what's our purpose in reviewing the STAR framework? But I think this actually hones in on the point that we were debating at the time, which is like, what's our essential gripe with the framework right now? And how do we ask experts how we attack that gripe using the best practices of the field? So that would be one question I would hone in on. I think another question I would hone in on is, we have heard that the STAR framework is trying to serve too many audiences. It's trying to both serve the purpose of accountability and school improvement and parent information. Are there systems around the country that do all three effectively? If not, what do the most effective accountability systems do, and how do they deal with those other aspects? So that would be my suggestion. And I really like that idea of like, could we get at the core of what could experts tell us about our biggest gripes with the system? That might also be things that our lay audience could tell us about the system. Like, I'd imagine that parents and, to your point, Dr. Reed, ed councils would have really strong opinions on what they mean when they say, or what they think could lay into that. And that could help inform our follow-ups with experts.
Okay, well, I like that. I mean, that part of what we want to ask experts is, what have you seen that does a better job than ours at? And to me, basically what we have said, I mean, what are the key gripes, so to speak? The two that I hear, let's add to them, but better job than ours at not being so biased. Again, schools with high numbers of at-risk students. And we could also say probably, ELL, SPED, it's, and second, a better job than ours at showing and incentivizing a broader view of quality practices. Okay, who's next? What are the things that we most want to know?
Sorry, I was typing, but I was typing our student where our student representatives probably would like some framing. I just looked at the top of the thing from a student perspective. And I raised that thinking about some of the young folks I've worked with. It gets to a point, I feel, that students actually start making some educational decisions for themselves. I remember being that student in high school, and then also running into students who are telling their families, I think I want to go to XYZ school. Or actually, I just talked to a mom. I didn't talk to her student, but she said after a while, the family just got tired of the early rise to get across town to attend school. So her children came to her and said they're ready to like go to schools in the ward. So yeah, I think there's an element to student level like decision making. I don't put it past students to start digging into certain things, and or athletics is another one that sometimes sways students on picking their schools. But I'm pretty sure our student advisory council would like somewhere inserting themselves in this process. Or
so you're saying you're not so much giving another part of this question about what have you seen that does a better job? You're saying a question for students that should be part of our engagement.
I guess I looked at the headers across the top and was saw like that might be an area that we missed.
To add students to the top. I agree. Okay. But what I thought you were saying, which I also think is right, is, and what is the central one or two things you would want to ask them, either from this list or a different list?
And I'm learning from those conversations sometimes, and even with parents, given just a really broad, like, what do you look for And that a lot of times generates at least themes versus the more technical questions. But I mean, I feel like, still you can balance both and even get, but sometimes just a broad question helps. I really don't know. I just noticed that they weren't there.
No, okay, fair enough. We need to, Darren, if you can add students. And Carlene, I'm just gonna push back at you on one thing, which is want to separate, not, I forget how you put it, what should be there, but it's what do you think makes for a quality school? In other words, because we want to separate out that part, which should be part of accountability because it's about quality, versus those things that I want to know and I'm interested in because I want to know and I'm interested. So and again, it's a mushy line. I don't want to suggest otherwise, but that it's close to the metro. I want to know that, but that really doesn't go to the quality that it has.
Oh yeah, are you talking about the conversation from last time, like with the ones versus like, is that what you're alluding to for accountability?
Well, sort of the report card versus the
STAR framework.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Report card versus the accountability framework.
But I mean, I remember, and it was pre, I think STARS or anything, but I do remember being a student who opened up the mail about school and saw like how my school, it was more about like tests for it, like either statewide tests, something happened. And I was just really, that had a lasting impression on me of seeing what my school allegedly, how it was performing. And I just would be curious about students who might be that child who happens to know that, their school rates in a certain way. I don't know, but
how does that feel? You mean sort of?
Yeah, because I distinctly remember, like, I mean, it's a 9th grade, 10th grade. Like, I'm sitting there trying to Google like what a percentile and this means, and it was almost kind of like, dang, are my teachers? I'm seeing my classmates do well in certain areas, but because at the time it was so based on, and that was I think No Child Left Behind had just snuck in right when I was about to come out of high school. But I remember that, and it sticks with me because you have an impression of, well, is this meaningful? Have I been going to a quality school all these years, and I'm about to go into college, and I'm going into college with this thing. I'm like, I might not be prepared because I saw something about my school that said they weren't preparing us.
I think, Dr. Reed, to your point, I mean, I think there's, that's some of why they did it, right? Is so that the public would be not necessarily fearful, but angry with the results, which would supposedly push LEAs to change, right? And I think using that fear or that anger as a lever is not helpful in this context, right? Like we definitely need to know where our schools are, but that the type of club that was used at No Child Left Behind, I think is certainly hasn't gotten the results that we wanted.
All right, we are later than I thought. So forget that activity, but 2 things I want people to think about, and then I know Darren wants to do some stuff on the work plan, but first for homework, what are the questions that you want to ask experts? And Jessica sort of posed that, what have you seen that does a better job than ours doing X? So I gave my 2 X's, not being so biased against schools with high numbers of at-risk students, and showing and incentivizing a broader view of quality practices, not just attendance and re-enrollment and test scores. Everybody needs to think about what would you want to ask? That is number 1 homework assignment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, first of all, I can do a lot of this, but the staff, and so far as they can help, to just go through what we have to start answering that, but also to identify, some people that we can ask. We can ask Pruitt, there's a couple of people, others that we can specifically ask these questions of. That's the homework. Now, before we switch over to Darren, the other big question I want to put out is who and how we're going to do this. And what I'm thinking is, you know, we started this last time, and I think in every ward, my guess would be, and we would want to encourage, you know, every member should have some meeting, whether it's part of their ward council meeting or an independent meeting, but there should be some effort to have sort of a public meeting about it. I would like to see us maybe send out some set of questions or a survey or something to sort of a big mailing list of principals, PTO heads, LSAT heads, ANCs, you know, just sort of a large universe of people, and encourage people to respond. I don't know that we would get a huge amount, but we would get some. So that's a second idea. And then the third is to really get very serious with a limited list, or a list, I should say, of very specific people that we want to talk to, who we think can, and it goes to Jessica's point, you know, who are both critics and non-critics, but who know the system and can provide us with some information. I mean, I have a little list here. First of all, I would go back to all of our previous witnesses. I wrote Aaron Cuny, Betsy Wolf, Josh Boots, Robert Simmons, Aaron Roth, Constance Lindsay. And I just remembered we could also go to some of the people who talked to us about high school growth. I didn't put their names in. The guy from Somerville, Jack. So that's sort of a set of experts. We can ask for more names. Advocates, I've got
That's
Kay
a
for DC.
good list.
What?
That's a good list of people. I appreciate all the expert input and stuff like that, knowing some of these people personally, but after we get a certain group of them or agree on a certain number of them, I do want this to be more parent community focused, if possible. I feel like a lot of these people, even when you come to people like Josh Boots and stuff like that, they were part of the task force and stuff like that, and they've had opportunities to weigh in on what the framework looks like. And it always seems like we give a lot of weight to what the quote, quote, experts say, understanding that they know a lot about dynamics and metrics and measurements and all that stuff like that. But then we end up with a product that we have now, very similar to what it is. And so whatever their goal is and whatever they want to get out of it, or who they want to appease, tends to rise to the top, as opposed to being useful for parents and communities. And communities just take and go, oh, okay, thank you. Now my school has gotten a 1 star. I'll be transferring my child to another school. That's what comes out of this from this stuff. I don't want that to happen. I've listened to a lot of the conversation. I'm still formulating what I do want, but I do know what I don't want. I don't want another framework that basically lambasts schools, teachers, communities, and people say, well, see, told you, this just confirms I go to a poor school, my community has poor schools in it, and there ain't shit I can do about it. That's the most frustrating thing to me, as a person, you know, who lives in Ward 8 and have been there for 20-some years, and a parent who had to put my child in the school, is that we're not really kind of like, okay, we devised this framework, but how does that help me as a parent or that school to become better?
Yeah.
That's my whole thing, and that's where my frustration is. I mean, these frameworks and everything are great, and I think a lot of people come in and say a lot of expert stuff, but how does that help me as a parent get a quality education for my child? And like I said, I've been through that once before, and I'm doing that now. And, you know, and I'll claim it and just say it publicly. The reason that my children don't go to Turner is because they can get a better education at Ludlow Taylor, which is still a DCPS school, but there's a difference in what they get. There's a huge difference.
Shaw, can I, sorry, Ruth, did you want to say something, or do you want me to?
I do, but you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think I absolutely understand what you're talking about. And I think one of the things that that we talked about a little bit in the admin meeting, and I talked in other conversations with Zachary and Emily, and Zachary brought up the point that one of the biggest challenges right now with the STAR framework is that there is no comprehensive support for schools that aren't in that lowest 5%, right? And
Exactly.
the STAR framework specifically, it lays out a breadth of scores. But if we're only looking at these scores, like the schools in that center section between the 5% and the stars, 4-star schools are completely left out, and there's not any type of support for those schools to get better or to do any changing or to anything. And I think that's one of the other things that I would love to see included in some sort of in a survey or talking with experts is like, what do we need to do as a city to change more than just the lowest 5% with these federal funds, right? Like,
okay, John Paul, can I just say, because I just want to
Sure.
keep us sort of on a path here, is on the assistance piece, which we all think is very important. We want to devote sort of a whole second phase to this and make sure that the indicators we pick are going to help do that assistance. I mean, I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
I can't see the questions, but is there anything about like the measures that we use?
Carlene, you've got the questions in your email, by the way. Just
Yeah.
everyone has the questions in their email.
Gotcha. But for right now, I can't see them. Is there something about like what measures we use?
On the questions?
Yeah, and I'll have it up.
So what I was assuming is that we would sort of have sort of the set of existing, maybe the existing measures, or maybe we'd give people some examples sort of, and they would respond, their views on those, how different indicators responded to those questions. Ask those questions about the different indicators. In other words, so attendance, right? That's one of our current indicators. To what extent does this tell you something you want to know as a parent? Or you might ask an expert, to what extent, do we find that attendance tends to correlate with subsequent school improvement or subsequent test score improvement? So the idea is, I would think, is that we would be asking people, we would narrow down some set of indicators to ask people about, and we'd ask these kinds of questions.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like the actual measures that are used. Like at the moment, I know like PARC is a big measure. But something that one of the principals that I was talking to actually from Kramer was mentioning, like some of the measures used are really great measures for OSSI to use, but aren't necessarily something that's helpful for the school team to use, or data comes out so late that it's, they already have made some adjustments on their own. And I'm just also wondering, like, are there other methods of evaluation that could be included that maybe either, someone either in these buckets, either advocates or experts or school leaders or some parent, I don't know, might want to say, like, instead of using, just like something about like how we're getting like how they're getting measured, or if there can be some feedback on there.
So feedback on the current measures?
Yes. And I guess also a wish list of what they would rather be measured on.
Okay.
So Ruth, the other thing I wonder about, and I do think this, I know we've covered this ground before, but it's important to keep coming back to, because I think it's going to be hard for our community engagement to avoid looping back on this. The purpose of the STAR rating is very specific. It's for state level accountability. We have used a certain messaging around also using it for parent school choice. And I think there's a reasonable question as to whether that's an appropriate use of it, right? Like, I think there are conversations worth having about it. But Jacques' point brought up one piece of it for me, and then Carlene's question brought up another. To Jacques' point, he made his school choice based on what he thinks is happening or failing to happen for his students at their school. So changing the metrics on the STAR and Jock, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but would not affect your decision about schools. Finding that different metrics might move the school you didn't choose from a 1-star to a 2-star or a 2-star to a 3-star isn't what's going to impact your decision making. It's about what you as a parent have seen and believe is available inside that school or not. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So I think this improvements piece, and to John Paul's point in the comments, we can't necessarily just make it a stepwise process of, we'll change the star rating and then we'll get to the supports, because it feels like the supports and what resources are available to schools is integral to what does or does not happen as a result of state accountability. So that's one thing. The second thing is, to Carlene's point, the metrics in the star that parents may not feel like are helpful to making changes at the school, or that school-based folks may not feel like are helpful to making changes at the school, they're right? STAR is not meant to be an assessment that helps a teacher change their practice for the students in front of them. It's meant to tell the state at a single point in time how it did or didn't do. So I think as we message these questions, we have to be careful that, like, we're not necessarily advocating that the changes to STAR are going to radically change the way a school approaches them and uses them in their data. Because that's where we got into conversations about changing assessment. Like, I do think that changing assessment and making different kinds of assessment part of state accountability could do that. But we've agreed that we're not talking about changing assessment. So we're changing metrics using all the same assessment that we use right now. So I just want us to be clear about the fact that, like, I don't want to promise the moon and stars to people as we ask them questions about what they think, and then deliver this marginal adjustment that doesn't actually fix the things they want to fix. Because I think that it won't help them get what they're trying to get. And I don't think it will reflect well on us in terms of what we may have encouraged people to ask for and what we were able to deliver.
You know, I'm sorry we didn't, I had thought about starting with this dashboard exercise that Jacques and I have done together, because I think it would help us focus some on these, but we'll do that next time. I mean, it gets us to really focus on the specific indicators. And anyway, we're, if we stay 10 minutes over, can people stay or no? I'm
This is on my
accepting.
calendar till 6:30. What time are we actually meeting till?
Oh, well, we were going to try to end at 6, but okay, we'll go to 6:30. No.
I mean, I'd rather not.
Can we
but-
go to 6:15 if it was on the
You
calendar?
can go to 6:15, 6:10, 6:15.
All right, very good. Listen, all right, I want to go back to something that Jacques said about the experts. You know, you said two things. One, that you really, really wanted to hear from the parents, and two, that the experts had created what we had, and so you're skeptical on that. I want to say two things. First of all, I want to hear from the experts about what they know has worked and not worked, and the effects it's had in different places. But to your point, you and me vote on this, not the experts, right? We can learn what we need to, we want to ask the experts the questions that are going to help us to make a good vote, but they don't set it, we do. So I just want to say, no matter how much we're asking them, it's for us to use to make our decisions. So I just want to say that. And so we should think about what helps us make a good decision. That's really what we want them for. And then the second is, I just want to focus on this issue that Jacques and Jessica are on, exactly saying the opposite things, which is really going to be somehow we have to figure this out. Jacques really wants to hear from parents about what they want, sort of what they want to know about their schools. And I think that's what you were saying today, Jacques, and in a separate conversation, the last meeting, I think part of what you were saying is what they want to know to hold principals accountable. What can they know, and as a result be able to talk to their principal about?
Kind of, sort of. I think me and Jessica are more aligned than it may seem at sense. I want to hear from parents, and I want to make sure that they're very much involved in what ultimately are the metrics that are on the dashboard that helps them to make an intelligent decision about the school that they want to attend or what's happening in the school. Okay, but also I hear Jessica, and I also agree with her that we can't promise the stars and the moons and everything like that, because we're not actually in a position to deliver the stars and the moon to parents in this particular framework at the same time too. So I don't want to say to whether it's expert parents or anyone else or any constituency group that this is what we're going to come out with, that it's going to solve all these problems and stuff like that, when we know there is a use for the framework that Jessica outlined and stuff like that. We're going to meet that requirement, and we're also going to provide parents, you know, some metrics and some things so that they can make decisions about schools and what's happening inside of those schools.
And I think what we can promise, quote unquote, I mean, what part of the big goal here is to make it not so biased. I mean, that is what we are, that is a big fundamental thing here. That we can make it that way. I mean, we can go very far, I think, towards creating a framework that is far, far less biased. Now, you're right, we can't produce the dollars that make the change, but we can, one, make it a lot less biased so that you don't have this impact of, you know, I go to a crappy school, or people feeling like, you know, their efforts are being insulted and indicted. All right, here's what Darren is going to send out the revise. Actually, I'm going to send to Darren my extra questions on this. He has some, and then we're going to send that out. And so part of the homework really is to add to these questions and add to the, you know, and cross things out, change them, do whatever you want. But so we know what it is we're trying to get. Is that a reason? Is that a good way to go? We've sort of had some pre-discussion on it. People can clarify their questions and who we want to ask it of.
Yes.
All right. And then, yes, Darren, put it on the SharePoint. Excellent. And then send us all, if you can, like just an email that says, here's how you get to the SharePoint, because I'm probably not the only one that wouldn't have a clue. Although I might be. But, all right. So the other thing is, and I think what I'll do is, I think we'll just do this more off, is I think I'm just going to send out sort of a proposed list of, here's who we should talk to. We should have these informal meetings with some individuals, and I'll make a list and people can add to the list. And some of this will be just, you know, I'll call so-and-so, you'll call so-and-so, and we'll get some answers. I mean, because one of the things I think we all want to know is to talk to principals and school leaders. And I think some of that is just as well done in one-on-ones with people we know who can be, you know, people who can be candid with us. And if we each do a few, we'll learn something. Does that make sense on sort of the principal school leader piece? We have some standard questions, but we all try to do a couple or a few.
Ruth, can I?
One question I have is, if the goal here, which I think we do all agree on, is coming up with a rating system that is less biased, there is a smaller set of questions we want to ask than the ones we have here.
Well, partly it's less bias and partly it's a less narrow view of quality.
Okay.
So it's two pieces.
Okay, that's different than what you said a few minutes ago. I just want to get a point on that. That, like, I think you're right that the thing we wholly agree on is that the system has been shown to treat schools that serve high numbers of at-risk kids differently, and that we want to fix that. So that I'm wholly for, and I think that would be a really narrow, clean set of questions we could ask and get some answers from. On the narrow view of quality, I think it's a reasonable discussion to have. I think it opens up a much broader conversation with a lot more complexity to it in terms of who understands what we mean when we say that, and how that interacts with what data we have, like stuff that's on the report card already, versus stuff that we might like to have, which is stuff we would have to build out a data system to collect. And so one is a nice clean set of questions that I think is a shorter time frame. The other is, I think, much more complex. Maybe I'm alone in thinking that. I think it is.
Look, all of this, anything we do is a step towards something else that, presumably happens in the future. But I think there are a lot of school districts a lot of states that already do stuff that's broader on quality in terms of climate surveys, teacher retention.
I agree, but like the point about Kentucky, they have a data system that we don't have. So how broad do we want the questions to go? Do we want to my point, overpromise that which we cannot currently collect? Or do we want to narrow it down to what's on the report card that you might like to see included in a definition of quality?
Well, I think that's one good thing to include. I don't think it's the only thing. I think it's a good idea to mine the report card for data that we have. And I think it's a good thing to understand what else we might want so that as we as a city go forward to try to get better data, we'll have things on that list. So, and some of it we can do with existing data and some of it we'll have to wait. Just like in the last STAR thing, we adopted it and a few of the things weren't even in there. We said we wanted them in there and they still haven't been created, the opportunities and whatever it is. So, we could do some of that too. But, there's two pieces of this. There's the engagement so that we understand what people are asking for and what the problems are. And then it's us also making, our choices about what we think needs to be there. The engagement being a big part of that, big part of the input. But I guess what I'm trying to say, Jessica, is at some level, all of these are complicated and at some level they're not. And I agree that we need to narrow in on some stuff. I do. But maybe.
I think I'm just responding, Ruth, that I think it would be helpful here so as to be clear with the public, whoever that definition of the public is. What is doable now in terms of if you tell us these things, we can take them into account and make recommendations to OSSI in the short term. What is doable in the medium term? If there are things on the report card you would like to see included in a STAR rating, that's a short medium term thing. We have that data, it's accessible, we'd have to set targets, we'd have to understand baselines, but the data exists and is here in the state system, we could do something with that. What would you like to see different for the long term? Data we don't collect, data we don't necessarily have defined. That's a really helpful thing for the board to know, but not something we can change now, and something that might take as many as 2 to 3 years to see changed in our system. I just think it's fair to be clear with the public about what we can and can't do, what we are and are not promising.
I mean, in terms of the messaging, I agree. I think in our engagement, we need to be clear that everything isn't short term and things are different terms, but anyway.
Right.
If we want to ask people what they want, we should ask them what they want. If we want to just give them a small group of options, we can do that. But I think people were pretty, I think anyway, some people wanted to make sure that we asked a broad question, what do you want? So then we need to do that. All right. So homework is look at this, edit these questions up, add to, subtract from, think about the list I send out about who we're going to engage. And I think I will take a crack per Jessica of, here's priority things to look at. See if I can try to do that. All right, Darren.
Actually, Ruth, I think I'm gonna just put the SharePoint for the work plan into the chat.
Oh, okay.
And this is, I think this, I'm hopeful this will be a little quick because it's more my question. And so my question is really on timelining for the work plan. And so members will remember that, like, at the working session, we talked about the work plan, and the admin committee has met and talked about the work plan. And shortly, hopefully by Monday-ish, you will all be getting a memo sort of laying out what the sort of plan is going to be. But as a sneak preview, as long as you promise not to tell anybody, since we do have 2 members of the admin committee here, we're going to try to go ahead with everything that's on the work plan. And I'm probably going to cry sometimes, but we're going to make this work, because we really want to get to all of these priorities as quickly as we can, because they're priorities and we want to do that. But in terms of the spacing, and Ruth mentioned this earlier in terms of the potential recess that we're going to have in this summer, my question is, what is the sort of order of things? You know, because this work plan for the Accountability and Assessment Committee lists by month, and I think there's some things that I just need to have a better clarification on, like what happens first. So is the committee, devising prior to public engagement, is there going to be a set of potential recommendations that we're going to have as part of this engagement work, or are we using the engagement work first to help develop that proposal? And that's more timing for me to try to understand when the engagement pieces will happen. And then this is the other part that we're going to then bring back to Advocacy and Outreach Committee and other committees about how to bring in other survey questions so that we can do a joint survey rather than potentially doing individual smaller surveys for each committee. And so that's the sort of broad question, is getting in a little bit into the weeds of nuance of when things are potentially going to happen, so that I have a better sense of planning.
Let me say one thing on this survey, because I think I didn't say it in the beginning. It was in my notes and I didn't, which is that the board is going to try to do, I think in August, a survey of the general public or families relevant to several different committees, including ours. But that's going to be late in the game. That's going to be in August. So it's not instead of, it's in addition to what we do publicly in June. So just want to say that. And so we might do, I think we would want to do something more informal, or sort of our own survey that we were putting out maybe at the meetings that we did in June, putting it out to our newsletter recipients. And as I said before, maybe you send it to the PTOs, to the ANCs, all that. And I'll put that in the note that I send out to you on that. So
that's in June is what we're talking about for that piece of the engagement. This sort of initial questions work is going to be happening in June.
The actual public engagement events are in June. So the development of the materials that would go out there. So, maybe a survey, a sort of the main points to make in a presentation. We talked about a pro-con sheet or a edited version of the interim report, something like that, some materials that would go out to people. And I'd like to be have us looking at them by this time next month, sort of that kind of set of materials, newsletter articles, things we might say, that kind of thing. And then this talking to, people, whether it's principals and school leaders, or it's, people in advocacy groups, some of that would start in May, as we just have some questions and people have time to just start talking to people. That's my thought. And I'll put this out in paper so people can comment on it, but that's sort of my thought on that.
So then that then goes to my question on terms of scheduling and making sure that we have the right meetings already set up. So is this committee meeting then again in April prior to, if we're going to start this in May, like at what point are we finalizing the text of questions and those types of things? Or are you thinking to do that offline and then come together in May and the early May meeting to finalize the actual things and then go forward then?
Well, it's not an early May meeting, it's like a mid-May meeting. And so we would do offline up until then, and then hopefully, pretty much agree on stuff at that May meeting.
Okay. Thanks. It's just helpful for me to understand, like.
That's my thinking. Which is why I really did, want us to get us really clear on what the questions are that we're asking. What we're trying to get from the, from this engagement. So at the end of it, we can say, okay, we answered these questions or we didn't, and here's where we go. All right. 2 minutes.
Could I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So the survey would lead to proposals to OSSI?
Oh, I'm sorry, to go back to something that John Paul asked. Part of what we had talked about earlier, John Paul, is that at the engagement, we wanted both things. We wanted to do some reaction to just what do you want? And we wanted some reaction to some sample proposals. So both. Okay, people. Everybody's going to get a minute back to their day. All right. Thanks, y'all. Talk to you soon. And you'll get stuff from Darren and me shortly. In fact, Darren, I think if we can, you and I should talk tomorrow. Jacques, if you can tomorrow, or else you and I will sort of connect.
Tomorrow's a holiday, so Darren won't be in the office.
Oh, well.
Monday?
Okay. Monday. All right.
Emancipation Day tomorrow, special holiday in the District of Columbia to commemorate something great.
Well, that's because I don't have an office to go to. I don't have that on my calendar, but I know that. I do know that.
I'm participating in all the activities of Emancipation Day tomorrow.
All right, everybody have a great Emancipation Day. Have a great weekend, and you'll hear from us shortly.
All right.
All right, bye-bye.